Welcome back. Kilmar Abrego Garcia remains in U.S. custody as his human smuggling case plays out. He was erroneously deported to El Salvador. That was an admission made by the Trump administration in March. And he remained there until very recently, despite a court order to bring him back to the United States sooner. His next court hearing is currently scheduled for Friday. Earlier, I spoke to the Abrego Garcia family attorney, Chris Newman. Let me ask you a big picture question. For, let's say, an American lightly following the details of this case, they might reasonably ask themselves, wait a minute, the White House keeps saying this guy, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, is a really bad guy. What are the stakes if he's not given due process, if he's such a really bad guy, and he came here illegally in the first place? What are we getting so spun up about?
Well, look, until Friday, Kilmar Abrego Garcia had never been charged with any crime either in the United States or El Salvador. But you wouldn't know that if you watched White House press briefings for the last 2 months. I went to law school 20 years ago. I've studied history. I have never seen a case in my life where the President of the United States has been as invested in the defamation of a single person and the prosecution of a single person. I think it's without precedent to hear the types of names that Kilmar and his family have been called by President Trump and the Trump administration. And yeah, so you've heard all kinds of terrible things about Kilmar, and all we've been asking up until this point is for Kilmar to have his day in court so he could defend himself.
And for a while, when either your representation or the representation of others asked the administration for some validation, more often than not, more than once, it invoked the state secrets protection to not reveal anything.
Again, this is part of the parlor game that the Trump administration has been playing, both in court and in the court of public opinion. On the one hand, speaking openly by spreading misinformation about people, on the other hand, saying that there are state secrets. I'll tell you, Major, I've gone down to El Salvador with 5 different members of Congress. None of them have even seen the contract that the United States government has with El Salvador for what is the biggest and possibly most dangerous prison in the history of the Western Hemisphere. And so, they deserve to see that contract. The public deserves to see the facts of the Trump-Bukele administration dealings. And certainly, Kilmar deserves to have his day in court.
And when that day in court comes, broadly speaking, what do you expect to happen?
Well, clearly, the Attorney General alleged very heinous things in her spectacle of a press conference that were not even included in the indictment, which is very rare. The Attorney General, which went rhetorically much farther than the indictment. Which is consistent with all the different types of names that the Trump administration has called Kilmar and his family. But it really is important to note that to the extent that Kilmar has received due process up until this point, he's never been charged with a crime. He was originally looking for work as a day laborer in front of a Home Depot and was picked up and arrested by a police officer who almost a month later was fired and then subsequently pled guilty for misusing confidential informant information. No charges were filed against him, but they said, oops, we're going to hand you over to ICE. He then fought his immigration case in court, functionally winning something called withholding of removal, getting work authorization and a reprieve from deportation. He joined a union and was, bettering his life. He was then mistakenly put on this plane to El Salvador. The attorney who first appeared in court is somebody I know.
Representing the Trump administration.
Representing the Trump administration, and somebody who fought vigorously against sanctuary policies that would have protected Kilmar. Had there been a sanctuary policy, Kilmar never gets handed over to ICE. You get falsely arrested, you get to go home that night. In that jurisdiction, they said, whoops, we made a mistake, we shouldn't have picked you up, but we're handing you over to ICE. He then wins his case. And then, obviously, a lot of the other history has been reported. President Bukele says, oopsie, when the plane leaves U.S. airspace. They say that we can't bring him back. They then bring him back. Everything has been upside down to the point where they first send him to a life imprisonment in the worst prison in the hemisphere. only then later to begin an investigation, bring him back, and charge him.
Broadly speaking, is this case, the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case, more than about one individual?
Yeah, I think the Trump administration is very invested in making this a referendum on the immigration debate, which, as you know, has become coarsened and polarized. And that is one way to look at it. And I think certainly a lot of people view it that way. I don't view it that way. I view this as a core constitutional order case, a core due process case, and it just so happens that a Salvadoran immigrant is defending bedrock constitutional protections for all of us. So again, Trump will say this is, somehow a referendum on our immigration system or proof of his demonization that he's been engaged in for 8 years. I look at it as, again, the other way, that people in this country, whether you're an immigrant or a citizen, are innocent until proven guilty. The Trump administration has done this in reverse. They've been treating Kilmar the way they treat all immigrants, as if they're somehow guilty until proven innocent.
And would you say, in general, to someone asking themselves, what are the larger stakes? If due process is eroded here, there are larger stakes that you may not perceive that could touch you, but eventually they might come in your direction?
Look no further than El Salvador, Major. In El Salvador, President Bukele came in and initially had astronomical popularity because he promised to make the country safer, which he did. But he then arrested tens of thousands of people with no due process. There are tens of thousands of people in the same position as Kilmar in El Salvador, people whose families don't know where they are, what they've been charged for, who's accusing them of what. What everyone in El Salvador told Senator Van Hollen, all the Congress people, is you in the United States need to act fast, because we see in the United States happening what has already happened in El Salvador. We in El Salvador have no more guardrails. We have no more Supreme Court. We have no more check against President Bukele other than public opinion. You all have to fight to make sure that you keep the bedrock institutions of your democracy, because we've already lost them in El Salvador.